Shana Tova. It's so good to be with you all. On July 31st, 2002, a bomb went off in the Frank Sinatra cafeteria at Hebrew University, killing 9 people, injuring 85, 14 of them seriously. I remember that day. I was living in Israel. I was up north working at a summer camp. And although I did not know them personally, 2 of the people killed and 1 of the people injured were part of my extended community in Jerusalem. This attack was perpetrated by Mohammed Odeh, a Palestinian citizen of Israel. He was from Silwan, a neighborhood on East Jerusalem. Odeh was the father of a 5-year-old and an infant. Mohammed Odeh was convicted of 9 counts of murder. This summer, I read a memoir, What Do You Buy the Children of the Terrorist Who Tried to Kill Your Wife? That's the title of the memoir, by David Harris Gershon, the husband of Jamie Harris Gershon, who was critically injured in the attack. It is the story of David's journey, both psychological and political, to seek understanding and to heal. This journey took him to meet the Odeh family in Silwan, to search for deeper answers that would help him to try to understand why someone who lived not too far from where he lived with his wife would commit such atrocity. Harris Gershon recounts what he said to the Odeh family when he met him. I want you to know that I'm not here for revenge. They have not come here out of anger. I simply want to understand you, to understand better Muhammad and how he could have done something so horrible. Whether we like it or not, we are connected by Muhammad's actions. And rather than think of you as enemies and forget about you, I have decided to try to understand who you are and how this could have happened. I am so moved by his courage, the enormous leap of faith, determination to dig deep into a painful experience in order to learn, to understand, to question assumptions that he had had all his life. Harris Gershon is very explicit that he's not on a journey of forgiveness, but of understanding. In his words, while Muhammad's murderous plot had brought me face to face with an undeniable barbarous element woven into the fringe of Palestinian society, I had also been brought face to face with his family, and what I saw was a normal people, a kind people, a broken people. I saw people who feared military uniforms, feared casual bureaucratic encounters, feared a knock on the door telling them that a child had been taken to prison. A people tired of the fear. Gershon Harris does something that most of us have a hard time doing, accepting that there are multiple narratives and multiple truths in one story, even when doing so means facing the evil that brought so much suffering to his own life. I personally went through a similar journey. For many years, I felt very confused by my own views, especially as someone who had also suffered the loss of my mother in a terrorist attack. This attack was perpetrated by people with similar ideologies to Mohammed Odeh. While living in Israel, I was invited once to a festival called Sulha. Sulha is a grassroots organization of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, Israelis, Palestinians who seek to develop a cultural coexistence inspired by the Middle Eastern indigenous process of mediation called Sulha. That was the first time that I shared my own story with a Palestinian. I remember being afraid, and I remember saying that I was afraid to hate them because of what happened to my family. As the Palestinian person listened to me, he cried and asked for forgiveness. Then he shared his story, the story of his people, the story of his own suffering, and I cried with him. It was then that I decided that I would open my heart to learn the story of who I thought was my enemy, and I would share my own story. The Torah reading we just read is the story of the binding of Isaac, the Akedah. This reading recounts the climatic event in the life of Abraham, the ultimate trial of faith. We read how God asked him to offer his son as a sacrifice. God tells him, Abraham, and he answers, here I am. And God says, take your son, your only one, who you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. And this is the story we know, that we tell, we interpret, we ask questions about it, we struggle with it, we study it, we are inspired by it. This is our story. But this year I decided to dig somewhere else, and I decided to learn about the parallel story found in the Quran, a similar but different narrative. Yes, in the Quran, Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son, his only son. In the Quran, the only son of Abraham is Ishmael. Isaac has not been born yet. His birth is announced, the birth of Isaac is announced after the story of the binding of Ishmael. Ayaz Afzar, the vice president of academics at the International Islamic University in Islamabad, in a comparative study of the intended sacrifice of Isaac/Ishmael in the Bible and the Quran, compares these stories, their intentions, their language, their narratives, the different roles played by each of the characters. Afzar writes, the two narratives use common motives, like the divine command to Abraham to sacrifice his son, the attempt to execute the command, supernatural intervention, and the provision of a substitute. However, they are different in identifying the intended sacrificial son, that is Ishmael or Isaac, in the details they give to the side of the sacrifice, in their attitudes towards the command, and in expressing the nature of the promise after the trial. I can go on and on telling all the differences and similarities I learned from this academic article. And I can tell you that I was fascinated by this learning. Mostly the notion that a story that is so embedded in our own narrative and legacy is told different in another nation and religion. Learning a new narrative does not minimize the importance, centrality, and even the truth of our own story. But it widens our understanding that there are different narratives and different truths. Is it Ishmael, the Yechidcha, the unique, the loved, the special son of Abraham? Or is it Isaac, Yitzchak? How do we feel when we realize that the story as told by the Quran doesn't make Isaac the main character of this defining and important story? We know that narratives that are core to our identity, our national identities as Jews and Palestinians, also differ in fundamental ways. Not only biblical, but also in our modern story. 1948, the founding of the modern state of Israel, an experience of triumph and jubilation for Jews, a narrative of rebirth. For Palestinians, 1948 marks catastrophe, loss of homeland, a narrative of tragedy. What do we do with the differences in our narratives? What do we do when the clash of narratives leads to devastating violence, as we saw in Mohammed Odeh? Do we choose the path of understanding and engagement, as did Harris Gershon, or do we simply condemn and turn away? This past spring, once again, we witnessed violence erupt in Israel. between Israelis and Palestinians, between Jews and Muslims. We witness attacks and counterattacks that even more cruel turn of angry Jews mobs and angry Arab mobs confronting each other in the streets of Israel. This latest round of violence lends strength to those who oppose peaceful coexistence between a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. Although we may feel that this violence has set back the decades of coexistence efforts between Jewish Israelis and Palestinian citizens of Israel, and although we may feel that the possibility of the side-by-side Israeli and Palestinian states seems near to impossible, and although we have seen the discourse around the Israeli and Palestinian conflict become even more polarized, I feel strongly that we need to be even more committed to the work of engaging with and standing with all those who are committed to peace. We need to engage and stand with Palestinians who may forever relate to history different than we do. The Palestinian national narrative will never be a Jewish national narrative, but who nonetheless believe in a future where Jews and Palestinians can both live in safety and dignity. How do we, the TBZ community, grow in our understanding, reach out in peace, and support those who stand for peace? As I asked these questions, I realized I wanted to go to Israel, that we need to go to Israel. We need to learn our own story, our narrative, and then we need to go further and reach beyond our own. We need to deepen our understanding of the story of the other. We need to have just a bit of the audacity and determination of David Harris Gershon to try to understand, to dwell in the pain, and go deeper in our understanding. We need to learn that we can hold our story, our truth, our pain, our suffering, our dream of a state of Israel with a more open heart to hear the story of the Palestinian people. I shared this vision with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Andy Vogel from Temple Sinai on the road, who immediately shared with me that he was thinking the same, and we decided to plan a trip together. So, I am pleased to announce that COVID permitting, TBZ and Temple Sinai are planning a multiple narrative trip to Israel and the West Bank. This will be a chance to connect or reconnect with Israel, to explore the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in detail and on the ground for a multiple perspective and multiple narratives. Together, we will focus on Jewish spiritual encounters in Israel, on understanding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict's roots, on meeting Israeli and Palestinian peacemakers and activists. Together with both rabbis, Rabbi Andy Vogel and myself, we will study, pray, sing, and celebrate. We will also challenge ourselves to really listen to unfamiliar perspective, to stories that may conflict with our own stories. The tour will be facilitated by 2 tour guides, one Jewish, one Palestinian, with encounters in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Haifa. And the dates of the trips are February 6 to 26, 2002. And there is a beautiful flyer outside that you can take to learn a little bit more. They're at the entrance of the sanctuary. My friend, TBZ member and CEO of Keshet, Edith Klein, who is here with us today, speak of Jews' relationship with Israel in this most powerful way. I know there are those among us from whom Israel is core to our soul. We think about it often, we go there, we rejoice and grieve with the people of Israel. Many of us also rejoice and grieve with the Palestinian people, and we see no contradiction there. Others of us don't think of Israel often and feel like it is an unhelpful distraction from the work we want to be doing. I understand the temptation to entirely avoid Israel because it is painful, because it is complicated, because it is fraught politically, but I believe we cannot. Like it or not, Israel is the most prominent project of the Jewish people. It is the single most vibrant, most visible and dramatic representation of the Jewish story. We have no choice but to engage. So I invite those of you who are able to engage to come with me on this journey. And if coming on this trip physically is not possible, this is a teaching that goes beyond a multi-narrative trip to Israel. As we're guided these high holidays by the psalm, in a metzar karati Yah, Anani b'merchav in my distress, I cry to you, Yah, who answers me by setting me free. I see this teaching as another opportunity for us to think about how we can confront uncomfortable truth from a place of openness, a place of merchav. Sometimes our narrow views do not allow us to see beyond. This is true not only in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or in the biblical narrative that we read. This is true in almost everything in our lives. Our stories are true, our narratives are true, there are our own experiences, but there are other true stories, narratives, and experiences, true even if they seem to contradict our own. Can we open our hearts, our minds, to more expansive ways of seeing and understanding? What do we need for that to be possible? What may we and our entire community gain in this process? I have so much faith in this community and in our capacity together to do hard, courageous work. May we all be blessed with enormous heart and wisdom and the ability to truly see one another in this coming year and always. Shana Tova.
Be